I am Noam Zohar, and I live in Israel in a village near Jerusalem. And the story I will tell is something that happened quite a while ago in 1987, just before the outbreak of the first Intifada. So that's how I can place it very clearly in time. And I was then a reservist, as I had done my regular army service. That was a civilian, but I was called up once a year for a few weeks. One day, I was called out with my crew. I was a sergeant, so I had 2 or 3 people under me, and we were called out to accompany a person from the Shabak. Shabak is like the secret police, the people who are working. They wear civilian clothes, and they are working vis-a-vis the Palestinian population, trying to prevent or counter the activities of terrorists, of militants, of whoever might make trouble. And we accompanied him, I mean myself and the 2 or 3 soldiers who were with me, as a security backup. That is, he was going to conduct a search in a home of a Palestinian and in Khan Yunis, and we came along with our guns just so nobody should make trouble for him, no one should resist him. He didn't make a very large mess. I mean, he didn't throw food out of the refrigerator, or it was not especially violent, but it was very disturbing, I could see, and impolite in the sense. And then at one point I asked him, "What are you looking for?" So he said, "Well, we had a report that in this house there was a suspicion that someone in this house was preparing Molotov cocktails." At the end, as we came back to the main room near the entrance exit of the house, the Shabak person took out a form from somewhere and asked the homeowner to sign the form. So I asked him, "What is this form?" Actually, I looked over his shoulder and I saw, because the form was in Hebrew. And the form said, "I, the person who was signed below, hereby grant permission for the search of my home, even though there is no court search order." And then I said, "Well, okay, but shouldn't he have signed this before you did the search?" Because it was granting permission for the search, and one would think that if he had refused to give permission, if he would dare to do so, then the search would not have happened, because there was no court order. And then he said to me, I have to quote this in Hebrew, and then I'll translate and explain. En mukdam umeuchar b'Torah. Literally, strictly literally, that means there is no early and late in the Torah. That is, now I'll give a less literal translation. The biblical text does not necessarily follow the chronology of the narrative. You cannot argue for early or late in the Torah. So that was his answer to me. A kind of, I hesitate to call it humorous. It was perhaps more cynical, harsh joke. But he said it with a smile. That is, it doesn't really matter so much, you know. We did the search, he gave the permission, and let's not worry too much about what happened first and what happened later. Well, this really disturbed me. In retrospect, I wonder why I was so angry, because there were more violent things which I had seen and known about. But I think I was angry because it gave me a window from which I could extrapolate. I said, well, if this individual did the illegal search this way, that must be routine. No reason to think that this is an isolated case. So if anybody investigates how the Israeli occupation is working, everything will be okay on paper. And here in reality, it's different. And I realized that this must be the way the system works. And I felt a very strong impetus to report this and write a letter and say, here is something I was witness to, and this must, I suspect that this represents the general practice, and something should be done about this. Well, a few days later, the first Intifada broke out with a whole order of magnitude of violence and on the part of the Palestinian population, throwing stones. This was still mostly the first Intifada, which was with very little guns, and mostly throwing stones and violent enough in itself, but in a controlled way. And the response by the Israeli forces, which had its own problems. So everything was several orders of magnitude worse than this event. And I never got around to writing the letter. It seemed no longer relevant in a way. When I think of that event in itself, I have the same reaction in memory that I did at the time. The anger and the frustration at the revelation to me. I was not completely naive. I had enough doubts to ask these questions. What is he signing? Why is it like this? But I was naive enough to be surprised. So in that sense, it was a disturbing revelation. A small window on a system from which, if you have some imagination, you can imagine how much injustice is going on, how much fear is being produced. In principle, it is sometimes necessary to invade privacy, to hurt people's dignity, even people where you're not sure, but you have a good suspicion, a well-based suspicion. So I know that this is an issue of balance, and sadly, that is the case. So I'm not fanatically saying, never invade people's homes and never search them when you're actually trying to prevent much worse acts of terrorism. But then there's the question of balancing it so that the power of the security forces does not become unlimited, to intimidate everyone, to crush everybody, to act on very poor information. So you would want a court to say, okay, you bring me some evidence that there's real suspicion about this household, then I sign that you can do a search. And then you don't do a search in just anybody's home. I no longer think that there's any one person or group in whose hands it is to make a change. I only realize that what is keeping us from peace is fear. Each side fears the other. And then it's very hard to move ahead and towards the compromise that I think everyone realizes is where we have to get in the end, when you're afraid of the other side. So then you become obstinate, and then you cause the other side to be more afraid. So I don't think there's any one person who could rescue us from this, but it's a request to all of us to try to overcome our fear.